How do we keep students engaged? It's tricky because every student is different. Different backgrounds, different experiences, and different levels of motivation. Traditional teaching methods can leave them feeling confused, intimidated, left out, unheard, alone, discouraged. Top Hat's dynamic courseware helps you personalize your teaching to resonate with all students. In your lectures, in your assignments, and even in your textbooks. You can create learning moments that matter to your students. With 14 question types, you can drive real-time understanding, encourage active participation, and give every student a voice. The more your students engage with Top Hat, the more insights you get into their performance, giving you more opportunities to adapt your course as the semester unfolds. This helps students build confidence and drive better comprehension. How do we keep students engaged? The answer is right in front of you. Top Hat. Make every mind wonder.
Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening from wherever and whenever you are joining us. We are glad to have you with us. I'm Eric Gardner. I'm the Director of Educational Programming here at Top Hat and your host for today's webinar, Engaging Hearts and Minds in the Age of AI. So we want to make our time together as interactive as possible. So if you'd like to warm up your fingers and use the chat to let us know where you're from, we'd love to see that. And please feel free to make use of the chat to share your experiences, resources, and thoughts as we go along. And if you have a question for our presenters today, use the Q&A feature to pose that, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And last, we will be sharing out a recording of today's presentation, along with a copy of the slides and a great resource on teaching with AI one of our presenters helped inspire. So AI is changing the landscape of higher education faster than many of us can keep up with. And I think it's pushing us to rethink what we ask students to do and how we actually support their learning. So if access to information is no longer the challenge, then our role as educators is starting to shift. I think the classroom becomes less about delivering content, even though that's still important, but more about helping students actually engage, assess, and apply knowledge. So meaningful learning, in our estimation, sort of the focus of the call here today, lives at the intersection of two essential dimensions. First, the mind, the cognitive aspect of learning, challenging students to think clearly, apply ideas in new contexts, exercise judgment, and reason through ambiguity. So that's the kind of intellectual work that builds real capability. And second, the heart. So fostering curiosity, belonging, and the motivation to persist when learning gets difficult. So in the age of AI, this becomes even more important. Our task is to design learning experiences that students can't outsource, ones that require thinking, participation, and hopefully genuine engagement. So that's both the challenge, but also the opportunity. And it's what today's session is all about. How do we design for that kind of learning intentionally? Well, we have two wonderful people to help us do exactly that. We're going to begin with Dr. Jessa Roisen, Professor of Philosophy at Ambrose University. So she'll share how she partners with AI in her own classroom to make thinking visible and to engage students in ways that actually stretch their capacity. And her work also inspired a ready-to-use guide for using AI as a learning partner, along with some low-lift creative ideas you can bring into your classroom right away. And then we're going to hear from Claire Castro, our Senior Manager of Product Marketing, who's going to showcase how new capabilities in Top Hat are designed to support the same vision, helping you build meaningful participation, more flexible practice for your students, and clear insight into how your students not only are sort of thinking and comprehending what they're learning, but their actual progress as well. So both the heart and mind insight into student learning. So with that, I can see Jessa, you're here. Welcome. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thanks so much.
So when you think about AI in higher education, I know you've been thinking about this for a while now, what do you see as sort of as the challenge for teaching and learning? I know that's a big question to open with.
So, as a professor of philosophy, I feel like I'm situated right at the heart of general education requirements. And that's a place where historically we've gotten away with assigning textbooks that students had really no choice but to read and gave them exams and papers that were a convenient way to assess their understanding. And the students had no alternative but to engage in the struggle that went into completing them. Now the students have this amazing tool available that allows them to avoid all that struggle. So we can't just keep doing what we've always done. And I think that's what makes AI genuinely scary for some teachers is that it forces us to completely change the nature of the game. But I think the real challenge is, so how do we respond to that? So I'm going to start with something controversial. When we talk about AI in the classroom, I think the conversation almost always goes to cheating. How do we catch students and what should our policies be? I think those concerns are real, but I think we're diagnosing the wrong disease. I think what we're actually seeing, particularly in the general education courses that I teach, is more of a curiosity problem. Students aren't just outsourcing their thinking to I think many of them weren't really invested in the thinking to begin with. AI just made that visible faster.
Mm.
So, the question that I've been wrestling with, and the one I want to explore with you today, is what does that look like to design for curiosity in an AI saturated environment? How do we help students become better partners in their own learning rather than just consumers of output? How do we shift the focus from the product back to the process? In my classes, I've started to really see two distinct modes of AI use emerge. And I think that the distinction matters when it comes to how we're going to design assignments. So, the first mode I think of as gaming the system. And I want to be careful here because gaming isn't about cheating. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. A student who games the system isn't necessarily trying to deceive anyone, they're optimizing for completion. The teacher requested an answer to a question, the student provided one, right? Without instructor transparency or student understanding about the purpose of the question, students don't really realize that they just undermined the very expensive education that they are paying for. The question they're asking isn't, did I learn anything? It's, did I submit what was requested? Did I meet the requirement?
Yeah.
When I hear from my students, they say things like, well, yeah, I Googled it, or I just used it to get started. I don't think those are signs of bad faith. They're signs that the student doesn't see the value in cognitive struggle. They don't know when or how the learning happens. And I would suggest, ask some of your students maybe about a concept on a recent exam. Ask them, when did you learn this? And often they will say, oh, when you covered it in class. And many of them don't realize that the assigned exercises or the paper was when the learning was supposed to happen, right? That struggling that they were supposed to be doing with those exams that were hard or those questions that were hard, that was them learning. So I think that explains why they don't understand why it's a problem if AI is doing the assignments for them because they already learned it from you, right? They don't need to struggle with it anymore. The other mode that I see though is more like partnering. And I think that looks completely different. When a student is invested in understanding, they aren't just passive receptors of what the AI vending machine is churning out. A student who partners with AI responds, they push back, they ask follow up questions, they use it to stress test their own thinking, not just to replace it. So, the gap between these two modes, I don't think it's about policy, it's about design. And that's what I want to focus on. So, Eric, did I lose you? You sound like you're muted on me.
You know what? I'm talking to myself, and I did mute myself. I was just saying I think it's a really wonderful way to kind of frame sort of the challenge, because I think it's also pointing at obviously the solution, or where we need to be focusing our energy. So.
Well, funny that you muted yourself, because sometimes I think when I'm teaching these concepts in class, I feel like I'm talking to myself. So,
And when
so
I muted myself, I thought I'm gonna forget, and lo and behold, I did. So anyway, I'm back. I'm back.
all the more reason for us to be intentional, right? Of what
That's
it
right.
is that we're explaining to people. So we're not talking to ourselves. Right. So consider this framing for just a moment. If we think about what's happening, um, I think it changes how we respond, right? Um, if gaming is cheating, our job is law enforcement. And that's not what I got into higher education for. That's not what I'm excited to do. But if gaming is compliance without curiosity, if it's what students do when they don't see value in the thinking process itself, then our job is to come up with better, more transparent design. Because I'll also say, I didn't get into higher education so that I could read and assign papers, right? I want to engage in the learning process, whatever that learning process looks like, and however it's going to light people on fire. So I think we need to ask, why doesn't the student believe the thinking matters? Or what would make the struggle feel worth it? What could we do that would make it worthwhile? And how do I help students to see when the learning part is actually happening so they can feel that learning? And that's a more interesting and, honestly, I think more solvable problem. So, what does genuine AI partnership actually look like in practice? I've started thinking about it in 3 different modes, and it's been kind of a helpful way to map out different kinds of assignments. So, the first one is thinking about AI as a learning partner. Students aren't asking for answers, they're asking for multiple perspectives or refining vague questions into more precise ones. It's making them better at asking good questions. So, the goal is developing the question rather than just retrieving an answer, typing something in, getting something back out. The second mode is AI as a thinking partner. So, this is where students use AI to stress test their own ideas. They ask it to argue the other side, identify weaknesses in their logic,
Mm.
or compare different reasoning frameworks. How did these work up against each other? It's essentially Socratic dialogue, but it's available at 2 a.m. in the morning when I am not available to my students. So, the third model is AI as a practice partner. Students try an approach, they get feedback, and then they get to try it again. And that's especially powerful for skill based learning, the kind where you can't just know the answer, you actually have to be able to do the thing. So, whether that's diagnosing a patient, if it's reading a financial statement, debugging a code, or constructing an argument, it's not enough just to have memorized it. You have to be able to put it into place. What unites all 3 of those modes is that the student remains the thinker. AI is the mediator, but it's not the author.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our job is to create an assignment in a way that makes that distinction clear and, here's a catch, rewarded.
And I think you're going to actually share a couple of examples now. That was good context.
Hopefully. Hopefully. Um all right. So let me give you a couple examples of what this is going to look like. And to do that, I am going to kind of commandeer the screen
Yeah,
and go
please go
mad with
ahead.
power here for a second. um, all right. So the first example that I want to do kind of plays off this notion of AI as a practice partner. So, what you can see on your screen right now is part of my biomedical ethics textbook that I wrote for my class. The way that I teach biomedical ethics is pretty skills based. And so it was really nice to be able to tailor the textbook that my students were reading to exactly how I wanted them to think about it. And so it just kind of frames some ideas about, how do we address problems in the context of the clinic. Gives them a couple of, kind of low stakes questions, make sure they're understanding it before we get to, okay, now it's time to apply it. Did you actually understand what you just read? So for this assignment, what I asked students to do was to use ACE, which is the AI bot that's located right in Top Hat, And I gave students this very lengthy prompt. But what that does is it sets up, they copy this prompt, put it into ACE. And what that does is it makes ACE into a discussion partner. It plays the roles of two people involved in a clinical mediation so that then my student gets the practice of being able to exercise those mediation skills. Now, the way this had worked in the past was that the only way my students were able to practice it was when they were coming into class. That meant all the practicing was happening in front of their peers, live learning, which means live correction, and it was uncomfortable and terrifying, right?
Yeah.
This allows them to take the content that they just read and then put it into the chatbot, practice the skill, and then copy the conversation back into Top Hat so that then I, as the professor, can go back, take a look at what they said, right? See how they did, and just kind of get a sense of where their skills are. They can practice it as many times as they want to. If they know I may be doing this in front of class tomorrow, I want to make sure I'm getting really good at this. But it also gives me the benefit of being able to see who are the students that have mastered this skill so that when we do the role play in class, I'm able to pick the people that are going to be able to demonstrate to their
Yeah.
peers, hey, this is actually really approachable and accessible stuff. We can do this, right?
I think that's so powerful. Like I think we talked about this earlier where, if they're getting this practice before class and then they do it in class, hopefully that dials down some of the anxiety of doing that in front of your peers on the one hand. But if I'm watching my peers go through this activity of a role play, I think I have a lot more empathy and hopefully understanding about, how hard that is,
Mm-hmm.
also where they're doing well, and maybe where they kind of missed the mark or should have been doing something a little bit differently.
Right. I mean, it makes the whole learning experience, I think, a little bit more engaging because, you're just sort of in it with them now. You kind of get what they're doing. You see where
Yeah,
it's coming from. Yeah. And the other thing that's really nice about it is that students aren't just writing about conflict mediation. They're actually doing it, right? The skill is the assignment.
yeah.
Um, and so I think that I mean it works great in ACE. That's where I built it. I think there's something even better that we're going to talk about later today.
Okay.
Um, but um, but but this works. This is one way to do it.
And this is you have a textbook in Top Hat.
Right.
And then the other benefit too is that ACE understands what's all the content that's already there, so it's hopefully not going off into, other areas that don't reflect, the focus of your learning objectives, your content, etc.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, words like positions and interests have a very particular meaning in clinical mediation, but if you just go out and look on the internet, it means lots of things, right?
Yeah.
So this way we
Yeah.
keep them focused.
Nice.
So do I have time to show you one more assignment?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So using that idea of the notion that I have students who are reading through the textbook. This is still my biomedical ethics class, but this is back when they're learning about Kantian deontology, which my students are really excited about. They've learned all of the content, right? Theoretically, I've asked them a couple questions. But so here was the problem that I was running into with this class. I had identified this very specific learning goal that I wanted. I wanted my students to have internalized the material. And what I mean by that is that I want my students to be able to recognize it in the wild, not just in the very confines of the classroom where it's going to sound exactly the way they're used to hearing it. But I want them to be able to deploy it under pressure. I want them to adapt it when the situation doesn't go as expected. So since I identified the problem was I was having students who were turning in exams, essays, papers. They're using all the right words. They're using them all in the right order, but it just wasn't clear that they were getting what they were talking about. So one way that I had asked my students to practice or just study kind of all along, rather than just going back and rereading their notes, was can you explain it to somebody? Could you take this concept that we talked about in class and could you explain it to your mom or your roommate? And that kind of gave me an idea because I was like, well, actually, that's a great way to demonstrate that you're learning it,
Yeah.
right? So I thought, okay, so how can I do that? How can I give every single student individually the opportunity to explain this content. And AI is a great way to do that because it lets me sort of do that at scale. Everyone gets a personalized experience by just having them do this. So this is back in my textbook again. Again, just like the last assignment, gave them a prompt to copy and paste into ACE. And then what that does is it sets Ace up to be acting like a pretty curious 10-year-old. Um, and what is great about this is that um, once my students kind of get Ace set up to be that smart little 10-year-old, then they start explaining the concept. And I just want to draw your attention to something that it does that is so perfect. Like, this is exactly the thing that you want. When my students started using terms like, I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but universalizable is a really big deal for Kant. And so they'll drop that term in, like, oh, it's the categorical imperative means it's universalizable. There's like 3 50-cent words in that sentence they didn't understand.
Yeah.
When you put it into the chat with Ace, right, it calls them out on it. It says, like, well, what do you mean by universalizable? Or what's the categorical imperative? Can you explain that? So they have to break it down a little bit more. It demonstrates that they really do understand what they're talking about, or at least it nudges them to go find out what it means. So now they're in a position where it's just a little bit more engaging. It's a little bit more challenging, and it's personalized for every single one of them. So depending on how this or that student is approaching the assignment, the ACE is responding to them. So it's not just me grading a summary that kind of checks all the right boxes, but I'm seeing the quality of their engagement through their conversation itself.
That's great. It's funny because I remember, that same concept, like teach your goldfish or teach your stuffed animals or something, and
Right.
there's a benefit to that, but
Mhm.
this is on 10x when the goldfish actually can respond back to you and challenge your thinking and
And
ask you to be a little
challenge your
bit clear.
thinking.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
Yep, I love that.
Um, okay, I'm going to the next slide here. So what are we looking at here, Jessa?
Okay, so this slide crystallizes the design questions that I now ask myself every time I build an AI integrated assignment. I want to know what the cognitive work is that this requires, and did I make that visible to my students? Have I been transparent about what it is that I want them to do? And can I think in terms of what's the skill or the mindset that I'm actually developing with them? And then here's the catch. That's probably going to be hard. There's going to be some struggle involved. So let's name that rather than it sort of alarming students or taking them off guard that, like, oh, I thought I learned this in class and now this is really hard. Telling them, like, this is part of the process, but this is the same skill that you're going to need when, fill in the blank. That's a really powerful sentence to add to an assignment sheet with students, when you can say, when you're working as an HR director, or when you're, managing other employees, when you're doing, all different kinds of things, this is the skill set you're going to need. Here's how you're going to be able to put that to work. So I think when we anticipate student resistance and we name it directly, it's not just busy work. This isn't just an assignment I gave you so I had something to grade. It's about this very specific thing. I think we shift the dynamic. So we're not hiding the ball from our
Yeah.
students. We're inviting them onto the court to play with us.
Yeah, I
They get
really
what we're
like
doing.
that. Yeah, it reminds me of the tilt framework, like the transparency in learning and teaching, where you're
Yeah.
being really direct and open about the point. And I do love naming the struggle. I
Hmm.
think can dial down anxiety, so it's not like I have to do an assignment or a bit of reading, and all of a sudden I'm feeling overwhelmed. If I can anticipate that, I think I go in with a very different mindset than if I
Right.
was confronted with that cold. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so this is a colorful slide here, Jessa.
um, Well, I mean, here's just kind of like a range of kinds of learning goals that, people might be thinking about, and how they apply into their classes. Um, but these are some concrete tested activities that I think move students from that gaming mindset more into the partnering mindset. So things like, debate opponents or teach back challenges, like the one we just talked about. So these and other ideas that are, I think they're going to be available to everybody in a resource that they can take with them after today. And they aren't just hypothetical ideas. These are things that I've built, tested, and revised based on what I see students actually do. So, what unites all of this and all the additional content that's in that is that it makes the student be the person who's doing the thinking. AI
Mhm.
can push them, it can challenge and respond to them, but the intellectual labor belongs to the learner and they know why it's important. So I'll hand it back now because I am genuinely excited for the new stuff that's coming.
Okay, yeah, and Jessa's doing a wonderful job of foreshadowing what Claire's going to talk about in just a moment because we do have some really neat new AI-powered features that definitely, I think, support a lot of the things that you're talking about. Now, full disclosure, as Jessa mentioned, what she shared is just the tip of the iceberg. She had so many wonderful ideas that we weren't able to include. We thought, well, why not create a resource inspired by these approaches and make that available to all of you. So what we've done is we've created our AI-powered assignments guide that includes sort of 5 teaching moves along with ready-to-use AI prompts and activity ideas so you can copy and customize for your course. So there's like placeholder content within there to allow you to hit the ground running. So if you're thinking, I really loved what Jessa shared, but I'd like some help getting started. This is meant to do that heavy lifting for you. So we're going to share this out in our post-event communication, so hopefully you check that out. So thank you, Jessa, for all of your insights today and for helping in the creation of this resource. And now I'd like to turn to Claire Castro, Senior Manager of Product Marketing, to share how we're thinking about the future of learning at Top Hat and where AI fits into engaging hearts and minds. Welcome, Claire. It's lovely to have you with us.
Well, thanks so much, Eric, and thanks so much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Roisen. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to be able to share some of the work that we're doing at Top Hat to help you design learning that is more personal, more human, and more impactful than ever, teaching that reaches both hearts and minds. So I have quite a bit to share with you today, but for those of you who have been with us for a while, you know that this notion of teaching to both hearts and minds is not really a new area of focus for us. It's the very foundation that Top Hat was built on. For 16 years, educators have used our classroom tools to turn lecture halls into active communities. We've seen the power of asking questions, of getting that real-time pulse check from your students, and then using this feedback to pivot in the moment. When every student feels like they have a voice, that's what makes teaching feel personal. But we also know that designing these interactive moments takes time. And time, of course, is the one resource that no one has enough of. So last year, we introduced our AI-powered lecture enhancer. So with the lecture enhancer, you can upload a set of lecture slides to Top Hat, and then with one click, you can turn them into an interactive experience for the classroom. So our AI-powered assistant ACE is going to review your slides. It'll identify topics and natural breakpoints in the content, and then it'll add questions and discussions where appropriate. This makes it faster and easier for you to turn every class into one that is both insightful and engaging.
And you can, of course, like edit those questions and reject them, generate new options, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's your classroom, so you are in charge. You can take ACE, you can use ACE questions as is, or you can take them as a starting point and adjust them as needed. Well, so that's the classroom, but of course we know that learning doesn't stop when the lecture ends. But the experience really changed drastically because in your classroom, learning is a conversation, right? A conversation between you and your students and the others in the class. It's active, it's personal, it's emotional. But when a student opens a textbook or a PDF reading when they're home, that conversation turns into a monologue. It's hard to focus, and honestly, it can be just plain lonely at times. So it's no wonder that we're seeing a massive shift in student behavior. As of this year, 92% of students report using generative AI in their studies, and they're not just using it to write essays or to cheat on their homework, as we just discussed. 58% say that they use AI specifically to explain concepts that they don't understand. And for neurodivergent students, AI helps address the critical need. 90% of these students say that these tools are essential for making complex text and complex tasks more accessible to them. So these students aren't just using AI as a shortcut. They are turning to AI because it turns that monologue into a dialogue. But of course, there's a risk. When they go to ChatGPT, these tools, they don't know your course or what you need your students to learn from your materials. So students are finding the engagement that they need, but they're drifting away from your source of truth. So we think the solution is not to ban all AI tools. It's to figure out where and when they make sense and then to anchor them in your materials. We need to bring that interactivity and that accessibility directly to your content so that when students are looking for engagement and answers, they are ultimately being guided by you. Now, that's the goal of Top Hat's content solutions, really to help you create the best learning experiences for your students, because we know that when content feels more like a dialogue, students stay engaged. And at the core of these solutions is flexibility. So with Top Hat, you can bring your own materials, your own writings, curated research, articles, notes, videos, slides. You could start with OER content or one of our interactive OpenStax titles. You can choose from an extensive catalog of Top Hat e-texts, or you can leverage content from our newest publishing partner, Wiley. Or if you want, you can do a little bit of all of these things. It's really up to you. But wherever you're starting from, we have you covered. Because our new ACE content enhancer, you can take any material and you can make it accessible, interactive, and relevant to your students. So for those of you who like a good acronym, my colleagues and I like to think about this part with 3 letters, AIR, AIR. So accessible, interactive, and relevant. So with Top Hat, you can bring AIR to your course content in minutes, right? Like not hours or days. Eric, did you? No. So, okay, so let me tell you a little bit about how you can do this, right? So I'm going to start with A, which is accessibility. And here's where you can start. So you can take a Word document or you can take a PDF from your course and you can upload it to our platform. When you do this, we process the content, extract the images, and we can transform it into a web-based page. And now, just with that simple act, that simple upload, you've already transformed your static file into a responsive experience that works well on mobile, on tablets, on computers. It supports keyboard navigation. The content is compatible with screen readers and other assistive technologies. Students can use a read aloud function on their phones to listen on the go, and the content can be made available to our AI study tools for an even more interactive learning experience. So like the ACE Study Assistant you saw earlier. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but already that's a huge improvement over a static PDF. But we can do better than this. Once your file has been transformed into a Top Hat page, you can have ACE review it quickly to identify common accessibility issues and help you fix them. So ACE can address problems like missing alt text, links that don't have clear text labels, missing or improperly formatted headings. So it'll look for these things, it'll suggest fixes for you, and then you can review or accept those review and accept or reject those suggestions as you like. So this helps you quickly meet Title II requirements and make your content inclusive to all learners.
Yeah, I feel like there's a deadline coming up in April around that for some institutions. So.
Yeah, this is definitely on a lot of people's minds these days. Sure. And, you know, not everyone is an expert on accessibility. The rules can be a little bit overwhelming. So the idea here is to make it more transparent and easy to fix.
That's great.
So making creating accessible, inclusive content isn't just about getting that compliance check mark. Like I've met Title II requirements, job done. Content that is truly accessible is clear and it's easy to understand. So ACE can also help you with this. You can use ACE to help you rewrite parts of your content. So you can highlight the text that you want to modify, and then you can ask ACE to do things like simplify the language, to make it shorter or longer as needed. to fix spelling mistakes, to adjust the tone, to make it more conversational or academic. You could even translate content into English, Spanish, or French.
That's great. I know we've gotten some questions about that in the past, so that's wonderful. We're able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. So all right, we've talked about A, the accessibility piece. Now I want to talk about I, which is interactivity. So just as with our lecture enhancer that I spoke about earlier, the lecture enhancer makes it easier for you to bring interactivity to your class sessions. Content enhancer helps you bring these moments of engagement and insight to the materials your students interact with outside of class. So you can give your students opportunities to check their knowledge with low stakes assessments that are generated from your content. So you can highlight the content you want to ask your students about. You'll click create, then select interactive question, and then ACE will spin up a question focused on the selected content. And it'll provide a supporting explanation so that students get feedback as they go. And just as with the lecture enhancer, you can edit those AI generated questions as needed. You can discard them and generate new ones. You're always in control. So, and all of this is fully accessible to students on both web and mobile devices. So no one has to miss out on this more immersive way of learning.
And you can assign those like points to those, etc., to make, to motivate a little sort of external motivation to get students to actually complete the assignment. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can give them, and you can also adjust, do they get points for getting the answer correct, or do they just get points for participating, for answering the question? So you have a lot of flexibility. So we talked about A, I, last letter, R, relevant. So sometimes students struggle, right, to understand a concept until they find a way to map it to something that they already know. Or sometimes they understand a new concept in theory, but they don't really grasp why they should care. So ACE can help your students ground new concepts by creating examples that help students anchor this knowledge and connect the dots to things that they know and care about. So just like with questions, you can highlight the relevant text, you can click create, and you can generate a personalized example. And you can tailor these examples that you generate to your students by providing ACE with some input as to what you'd like the example to be about. So for instance, you have a bunch of students who come from all over and now they live in the same small college town. You could help them find examples of how these concepts apply right here in their new hometown to help them feel more at home. Or maybe you have a bunch of nursing or pharmacy students in your class. So you can ask ACE to show how a concept might play out in an interaction with a patient. Or maybe you're covering this material at the height of March Madness and everybody is really focused on basketball right now, right? You can ask ACE for a basketball analogy. So the possibilities are really endless. And as always, you're always in control. So you can review, edit, or discard ACE's suggestions. So ACE can do a lot with your content, but the most important thing to remember here is this: regardless of the content that you are using, you now have the power to make your material accessible, to make it more interactive, and to make it relevant, and to make it yours. So all the features that I just showed you of the ACE Content Enhancer, these are available now in Top Hat. And you can do all of this with existing content in Top Hat as well. Okay, so now we've made our content more personal and accessible. So let's talk about what happens after it's delivered. Personalizing content does go a long way toward helping students connect to the course, but connection is only the first step. To help them actually retain what they've learned, we need to couple that personalized content with personalized support. Now, remember those AI study tools that I mentioned earlier? Well, once your content is in Top Hat, you have the option to enable 2 student-facing tools to help them master it. So the first we saw earlier in Dr. Roisen's presentation, that's our AI-powered study assistant, ACE. So students can chat with ACE about what they're learning, and they'll get relevant responses built from the context of your course material. So they can ask ACE to help them break down complex ideas, to define key terms, to check their understanding in the moment, right when and where they need it. So it's similar to their experience with ChatGPT, but it's being guided by your course content. Now, students can also use ACE to build confidence through AI-generated practice sessions. Practice sessions are very popular with students, and that's for good reason, right? They work. And a lot of times, students want more than just a few questions. They want like hundreds of questions to practice with. And what they really want to practice with, right, is the stuff that they're not sure about. They don't know if they know. They want to build up their confidence. So practice is most effective when it's tailored to each student. So here's why. So courses are typically designed as a linear journey. There's week 1, week 2, week 3. Every student moves through the lectures, the assignments, and the quizzes at roughly the same pace, regardless of their understanding. But student learning is nonlinear. Students enter the course with different knowledge gaps. They struggle with different concepts as we go along. And traditional grades can tell students that they are struggling, but rarely do they tell them why or what they can do about it. So without this insight, then students move forward with unaddressed learning gaps that compound over time, and these can then threaten their persistence and their success. So historically, solving this problem has been incredibly challenging because you can't manually map out a unique recovery plan for every single student in a class of 300. But with ACE, it is finally possible to deliver that level of personalization at scale. So Top Hat ACE uses data from student interactions to identify individual learning gaps and provide personalized practice opportunities to help close those gaps. So how does this work? First, ACE understands the course. Behind the scenes, it reviews your content, it identifies the learning objectives, and then it maps the relevant parts of the course, all the content in the course, to these learning objectives. And then it looks at how the concepts relate to one another. Then ACE looks at every student. It looks at their interactions with the course content, their answers to questions, and then it calculates a progress score for each one of these objectives. So it knows exactly where a student is strong and where they are struggling. And then ACE bridges the gap. It'll take all of this data and use it to generate today's practice. So it'll serve up these specific bite-sized study sessions consisting of practice questions that are focused on the exact areas that the students need to improve. Wow. So these sessions, they're refreshed daily and they're grounded in learning science. So they encourage spaced repetition. They're nice and short. You can check this daily and work through your practice cards here. So they improve retention through this spaced repetition, and they also provide real-time feedback so that the students' misconceptions are corrected instantly. And we can take this further. So with progress insights and real-time interventions, ACE can power both personalized pathways for students and actionable insights for professors. So by using data and AI in these ways, you can move from teaching to the average to teaching to the individual. So, of course, technology alone cannot drive motivation, but you can. Because when students feel supported, challenged, and they understand why they're doing what they're doing, then they put in the effort, right? Then they're curious, then they're invested. So coursework becomes less about completing tasks and more about feeling this sense of accomplishment or personal growth. And with the unemployment rate at an all-time high for college graduates, it's more important than ever for students to have a safe space to practice applying skills, to practice solving real-world problems, and to prepare for life outside of school. So that's where authentic assessments come in. Now, at their core, authentic assessments are designed so that students need to show how they think, not just what they remember. They need to execute judgment. They need to communicate their reasoning, and they're applying creativity to solve problems. So it's not just about the product, it's about that process that we talked about earlier. The challenge, of course, is that authentic assessments can be difficult to scale, especially in very large courses. And that's where the right application of AI tools can help. So we are actually currently piloting a new assessment type called scenarios. And here students step directly into a simulation of a real world scenario, and then they'll interact with an AI persona to solve a problem. So they're given clear goals for their conversation with this persona. They know the problem they need to solve. And then throughout the activity, throughout this whole conversation, they're receiving step-by-step feedback as they work to solve the problem and meet those goals. These activities allow students to get so much deeper than just practical recall. So instead, they get to practice critical thinking and to apply knowledge in a really practical and engaging way. Now, another way that we can help students learn through assessment is via video assessment. So these are where students respond to a question or a prompt with a video recording. These activities allow instructors to see and hear how students explain their reasoning, how they communicate ideas, and demonstrate empathy, reflection, professional presence. They get to practice presenting and articulating their thoughts, developing the kind of soft skills that are consistently ranked among the most valuable by employers.
Yeah.
So we are in the process of rolling out video questions. The limited release began yesterday, and soon we're going to be adding the ability for ACE to provide a summary of students' recordings to the instructor, so it'll make it a bit easier for instructors to manage and provide their own feedback at scale.
I love both of these examples because I think, you're raising the stakes. I think with scenarios they can obviously practice and go through things, but you don't as well as you think often until you're actually challenged with, okay, present that back to the class, the professor, or actually go through the activity where you really need to demonstrate your command of those particular skills. So it's a lot different than you feel that you understand something because you've read it in a text versus actually having to do it sort of live, if you will.
Yeah, completely. And the scenarios, they're fun to interact with. I've worked on a couple of them myself, and it really is, it is literally the dialogue, right? That we're saying students are missing when they're outside of class. So definitely powerful activities. Now, last but certainly not least in the area of assessment and looking at how students are applying skills, we have some new discipline-specific assessments. So Top Hat already has more than 14 different question types and templates that you could use to assess everything from recall to analysis and creation. But we also know that there are some subjects that have unique needs that require a more specialized solution. So for example, a multiple choice question isn't really going to help you fully assess something like a student's ability to write code.
Yeah.
So you need the right tool for the right job. And so that's why we're launching 3 new discipline-specific assessments. So the first is in economics. So students can now manipulate variables on interactive graphs so that they can see cause and effect in real time. Then in organic chemistry, we've integrated active chemistry's active grid questions. So now students can construct complex molecules in a really visual and intuitive way. And then in computer science, we've added auto-graded coding questions that give students that hands-on practice that they need to actually write and test code. So each one of these tools allows students to practice the authentic skills of their field and to build confidence as they learn. So now I want to take it back to the classroom, right? We've talked a lot about content that connects and assessments that challenge, but let's bring it back to where we started, and that is the magic of the live classroom, that specific energy when you are in the room with your students. To cultivate meaningful learning, you need visibility. You need to know what students understand. You also need to know how they feel. Are they confused? Are they excited? Are they actually with you, or have they completely checked out? So asking your students questions during class has always been a great way to capture how students are feeling and doing. But of course, you can only ask so many questions during a class because after all, you have content that you need to get through. So with our newest classroom innovations, we are providing more opportunities for students to express themselves without necessarily needing to interrupt your flow. So the first of these innovations is live reactions. This real-time feedback tool lets students react to your lecture using emojis. So we know that for many students, especially in large lecture halls, raising a hand to say, I'm lost is terrifying. So live reactions is meant to remove that barrier. It gives students a really safe and low stakes way to signal how they're feeling in the moment right from their phones. So they can tap a thumbs up when they get it. They can send a question mark when they're confused. They can even send a heart or an applause emoji when a concept finally clicks. So for the student, it's this really easy way to participate without fear and without you even having to stop to ask a question. And for you, it's a real-time pulse check. So I speak in front of large groups all the time, and I know that feeling of not being sure if everyone is with you. I've been speaking for a while now, and I'm really hoping you all are with me. With live reactions, though, you don't have to guess. You can see that sentiment floating right on your screen.
Yeah, it just made me think, Claire, we need to get some emojis going for our next webinar somehow.
Yes,
so
definitely.
We'll have to figure that out.
I would love some emojis. So we also know that when you're in the flow of teaching, it can be hard to catch everything. So in the classroom, you already have a general sense of how your students are feeling. And of course, live reactions can help with this, but it can be hard to quantify this or pinpoint exactly where and when students started to struggle. Sometimes you don't know exactly how big the gap is until you see the quiz scores a few weeks later, and now you have to course correct. So this is why we built Lecture Insights. So this is a new AI-powered report that is generated immediately after every class session to give you a clear, actionable snapshot of what went down during class. So it'll break down exactly where you spent your time. It highlights the specific slides that sparked the most engagement or confusion. You can see where the energy was high and students were sending all those hearts and thumbs up reactions, and you can see where they started to get lost. And then it'll also show you where students did well on questions and where they struggled, so you know exactly what to help them with before the next class. So together, these tools give you the visibility to stop guessing. So this is how we move from teaching to students to teaching with them. It's how we create classrooms where feedback flows both ways and where students don't just listen, they contribute, where you're no longer guessing, but you're actually adapting.
I love that, like being able to get an insight into not only the cognitive part of the learning process, but the affective side of the learning process. I just think it's kind of a game changer for sure.
Yeah, because if you're not feeling it, you're not learning, right?
Yeah.
So, speaking of adapting, we are constantly adapting as well. Everything you see on the screen here represents a specific improvement that we've made to our platform over the last year to make the lives of the instructors and students who use Top Hat a little easier, right? And these didn't come from a boardroom, they came from educators and from students. They are the direct result of your feedback, your requests. So thank you to anyone who's provided feedback on Top Hat. Together, we feel like we're building the future of learning with you. And as educators, you have always done more than deliver knowledge. You help students make sense of themselves, their questions, their place in the world. And in the age of AI, this role only grows more vital. Because while AI can deliver answers, it can't spark curiosity. It can't build resilience. It can't teach students to think critically, to care deeply, or to persist through ambiguity. That is your domain. And with the right tools that are accessible, adaptive, and aligned to how learning really happens, you can design experiences that reach both the hearts and the minds of your students. So thank you so much for your time today. And Eric, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Claire. I feel like I've been at Top Hat for a number of years now, and I feel like the past year to 2 years in terms of the pace of innovation and really the focus on helping instructors in their practice and creating better learning experiences for students, it's just at a whole other level than where we're at. So it's really exciting to see these things get into the hands of faculty everywhere. So thank you. Now, I think we'll have maybe a couple minutes for a couple of questions, but I do have a couple of housekeeping items. First, we have an incentive in play. So if you're not currently using Top Hat and you're teaching in higher education and planning for the next semester, we're offering a personalized demo for you to see how Top Hat can actually fuel engagement and deepen learning, and maybe explore in more detail some of the features that Claire shared with you today. So if you're interested, we just launched a poll on your screen. So let us know, indicate your interest there. And eligible higher ed faculty who sign up for the demo, like I said, we're sweetening the deal. We'll give you a $25 gift card as a thank you for your time and interest. And I mentioned our learning resource, the AI-powered assignments, a practical playbook for more engaging learning. That will be coming your way in our post-event communications. So there's a lot of really great ideas and ready-to-use activities in there for you to inject into your course. So again, I'd encourage you to check that out. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to plug our podcast. Higher Learning's Season 4 is officially afoot. So if you're not in the know, Higher Learning's features a who's who from the world of teaching and learning. And this season we feature talks on making learning matter for the Y generation with Mark Perna, who's wonderful. Leveraging positive psychology to help ourselves and our students thrive with Flower Darby. We just released an episode on the power of mattering with psychologist and best-selling author Zach Mercurio, who we hope to get on a webinar in the not too distant future. So we like to think of Higher Listenings as your pedagogical pick-me-up and a great way to expand your teaching practice wherever and whenever you listen to your favorite podcast. So check that out. And we've got time for a couple of questions, so maybe I can bring Jessa back because there's a couple of things here I'd love to ask you. You've done a lot with AI in your course and creating sort of AI-powered assignments to drive critical thinking and to get them sort of practice what they're learning. How have students respond to that on the one hand, and what sort of differences have you noticed in their approach or thinking since you started using these activities?
So for me, the biggest difference that I've seen with them is their ability to be more confident with the work that we do in class, so that they feel like they know what they're doing, and some of that struggle can happen sort of off screen, so to speak, that they're okay with it. They get what's going on. And I think it also kind of opens the classroom up a little bit for deeper kinds of questions, right? Because I think sometimes, like Claire said before, when you're used to talking in front of a group, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And just because they're not asking questions doesn't mean they don't have them. Sometimes they're so confused they don't know what question to ask. And so I think just giving them some tools to let them work with it and play with it a little bit, these ideas a little bit more, gives them the chance to ask some of those better questions.
Yeah, I think that the actual practice, like real practice, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
And they're not being confronted with the real practice until they get to the midterm or the final exam, that sort of thing. So,
right.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Okay, I've got time for one more question. I want to throw one to you, Claire. So just maybe take us home with this one. If you were to take a step back and look at everything that you sort of showed today, what do you think is the biggest shift in how Top Hat is supporting sort of teaching and learning as we go forward?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that it's not so much a shift as I think an acceleration, because these are what we're looking to support with are things that we've supported with for some time. But I think this new technology and being able to leverage AI is helping us do it even faster and at a bigger scale. And I would say, I guess maybe to answer your question even more directly is I think we're this notion of using both AI and data to really personalize the experience is going to be a big theme, right? So we talked about ACE practice and the idea that ACE knows what's going on in the course, it knows what's going on with the student, so therefore it can point the student in the right direction. There's going to be opportunities to provide more actionable insights for instructors based on that kind of information as well. Here's what's going on in your course. Here's how the students are interacting with all these different elements of your course, and therefore here's what you can do to support your students, either individuals or as a whole. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that from Top Hat.
It's funny, we've talked about personalized learning for years, and all of a sudden it's kind of arrived, which is really exciting. So thank you, Claire, for sharing with us today, and thank you, Jessa Roisen. And thanks for all of you for spending your time with us. We know you're all busy doing your all-important job of teaching and learning. We really do appreciate it. So on behalf of everyone from Top Hat, hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone.